Well, welcome to an exclusive interview with the Kooman Brothers. We have Andrew, Matthew, and Daniel Kooman. These are the filmmakers responsible for a very powerful production of MAiD in Canada. And I've had a chance to view some of it. And I want to tell you guys to start off, this is very, very powerful. And this is an issue that I've written about as a columnist, and I've written a few stories about it. But I think what you're doing is tremendously important to the national interest. I'm just wondering what triggered, maybe that's the right word, what did trigger you to begin this filmmaking experience, this documentary?
Well, yeah, it was multifaceted. I think what happened was we started seeing a lot of people talking about the changes specifically coming originally in 2023 for expanding MAiD for sole condition of mental illness. I think when that moment happened, at least on my own feed and also in my email inbox, it was just like every day there was people sending me, oh, have you heard about this? Or are you concerned about this? And I think because we've done issue-based documentaries in the past, we had people wondering if this was something we were thinking about telling a story about. And it really was that combined with then meeting a few people who had personal stories of kind of abuses with the current system of MAiD. For example, outgoing calls to people who had a health condition or a disability. Like I've heard stories within my own small community on Vancouver Island of people who had outgoing calls come in and they had a minor health condition. Like they were going to live 30, 40 years and somebody phoned them and said, have you considered MAiD? So when we started hearing stories like that and the abuses going on, I think that's, for me anyways, was a trigger point of wanting to look into it further with initially some skepticism and then finding out that there was a lot more stories like that.
Yeah, I should mention, because it was my responsibility to do so, but when we're talking about MAiD, we're talking about medically assisted suicide, and we tend to talk in these acronyms about everything, but I think this is something we have to keep getting back to what this is really all about. It's about people killing themselves. It's about suicide. And, the government comes out with something called MAiD, and it sounds so harmless, so innocuous. Mm-hmm. And, but of course, it's not. I'm just curious, what part of Vancouver Island do you come from?
Matt and I are out here on the Comox Valley.
Ah, you're kidding. That's my hometown.
Really?
I'm born and raised in Comox. My father was a Air Force officer, and I ended up back in Comox in the Air Force. So it is my hometown. I'm going back for my high school reunion this summer, and went to Highland.
You'll be flying into the MAiD capital of Canada. That's where like the highest percentage of MAiD deaths are.
Well, this is what I was reading here. I mean, I found this absolutely stunning. Greater than 11% of all deaths, Canada's prime retirement destination, Vancouver Island, are due to assisted suicide. I mean, that is astonishing and shocking. Any particular reason that would be the case? But because they're elderly, or?
I think it's part of that. I think a lot of this is demographic of older, wealthier people are largely leading the numbers in this. So there's that population is large here on the island, which is, some doctors are saying it's maybe as high as 15%.
Yeah.
So one of the issues is the recording of it too, right? We don't know what's really happening. But then I think back to like your first question was what got us into this. I think just the shocking nature of the facts as they come out and as you get aware of what's happening, it's like, wait a sec, is that really true? Let's look into this. And then you go and find out, oh, well, it's actually worse than you're being told. It goes deeper than that. And so I think on the island, definitely it's that demographic, the kind of people who are looking for this, we're told they don't want to end their life with suffering. And so a wealthier, older population is obviously going to have a propensity to lean that way. If it's made available so easily and so readily.
Well, I guess I find that concerning because I can't think of a nicer place in Canada to live not die, but live on Vancouver Island. The climate is wonderful. We have the mountains, we have the ocean. I don't know anybody who wouldn't want to live in that kind of environment, and yet people are choosing to die. Is the government fostering a culture of death in this country?
Well, I don't know if they're like running out to champion life. What's been interesting, and I'll take a swing at that first question too, because coming out of the fog of the pandemic, I think what shocked me was how pervasive it is. And so like I'm on the other side of the country. I'm near Toronto in London, Ontario. And I just was shocked when I read an article by the journalist Andrew Lawton, and then I read an article in the Free Press, and it's like, why have I not heard about this? I hadn't been maybe paying attention, but as I started to learn about expansion to mental health, the recommendation that children, mature minors as young as 12 years old might expand to them, as the special committee on MAiD has recommended. That shocked me. And then what I realized, it's so pervasive. And so as we started talking about it, as we started to share that we're embarking on this project and share the first footage, people are coming, just my relationships, people at my church are saying, oh, I was offered MAiD and I didn't want it. Or my grandparent took MAiD because they were suffering from a issue that they couldn't get treatment for, and just how in the culture it already is. And so just by talking about it, we're finding other people are talking about it. And so about that culture of death, it's what I find is so, I don't know, there's a lot of words I could use: shameful, heartbreaking, sobering. For almost everything else, it's like cancer, diabetes, heart conditions. We want to stop the cause of death. And as it MAiD climbs in areas like Vancouver Island to be one of the lead causing factors of death in Canada, it's the one thing that we're okay with, it seems, culturally, or that the government is saying is natural, it's good, it's compassionate, it's dignifying. We're trying to stop all other types of death, but as MAiD climbs, we're sort of accepting it. And I've been reaching out to MPs, and I had one MP, a Liberal member of Parliament, say, as Canada gets more comfortable with MAiD, we're going to continue to expand. So there is, I think, an ideological push by certain members of Parliament, and perhaps one or two parties in particular, to be comfortable with medical assistance in dying, or assisted suicide, which is probably a better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, medical assistance in dying. As I said earlier, it almost sounds like it's a positive thing. It's not. They're not even calling it suicide. I would call this a euthanasia program, and I've called it that. And I've been criticized for calling it that, but I don't think there's any other word that fits it better. This is euthanasia. It's been tried in other countries around the world. Historically, we remember the Nazi euthanasia program, which was actually one of the few things that the church in Nazi Germany and many Germans fought against, because it actually affected a lot of families in ways that perhaps other repressive measures from that awful regime didn't. But the euthanasia program was actually arrested prior to the Second World War. Because even in that regime, there was horror that family members were being trotted off to a hospital and murdered. And I think we need to attack this as a euthanasia program. And why do you think the government backed away earlier this year from including the mentally ill and children in those who are eligible for this program?
Well, I can do just a short touch on that. I think people are realizing what's actually happening. I don't think people are aware what's been happening in Canada through the pandemic. People have been kind of saying, as much as we're on our devices and things, we're kind of out of touch, right, with what's happening in Parliament, and people becoming aware that, wait a second, medical assistance in dying for the mentally ill, that doesn't seem right. That they're finally cluing in how far it's gone, and they've had a lot of pushback in Parliament now from regular people saying this isn't okay, from disability advocacy groups. They're all opposed to this, and that's something we touch on the show, is like there's not groups pushing for this who are in the disability advocacy area. And so just becoming aware of how, you know, it's really a bigger, there's a bigger push from the government, from, you know, the federal government currently, to expand the program than we knew was there.
And I think on top of what Matt is saying, so there was the awareness, and I think it almost would have looked like, it would have looked as aggressive as it was if they pushed it through this year. But the push back, it's kind of a catch-22 in a way, because it almost in the legislation says that there's nothing to stop it now from going through next year in March 2024. And that's incredibly frightening, because every single one of us knows somebody who's struggled with a mental illness, or at the very least something like depression or a low season. I mean, for most people, that's when they look in the mirror, they realize that they've struggled with that. So if every soul in Canada is suddenly somehow eligible, if you take the language in a certain direction, that's extremely frightening.
Yeah. So you think the government will eventually, if this government is still around in a year, you think they will try to reintroduce this at a later time?
I think
the date is set in stone. They didn't really, all they did was delayed it, and there's some language there that basically says it's grandfathered in on that day.
Well, and I think we want to urge Canadians to really be mindful and to really lean into this conversation, because I emailed every member of parliament individually just to ask them for their stance on medical assistance in dying, what they think about expansion, and get their perspective, and to share my concern as a citizen. And it's interesting how the parties fall in their responses. You know, most of them are their kind of talking points that they share, but there's a real sense in all the responses I've got from Liberal Party members of this current government, they are highlighting that the 1 year of pause is a safeguard in and of itself that's sufficient. That's what I'm reading between the lines. And so there's this sense that, oh, we took 1 year to be extra careful, but there's language that they highlight that the system really is not yet ready for the change also. So part of it is a precaution, but part of it is that there's not a consistent implementation process across Canada. And I have direct language from MP saying, like, we need to ensure that the system is ready for expansion. And, you know, with at the same time assuring, you know, someone who's depressed will never get it. Someone who is suicidal will never be offered it, or there'll be so many safeguards. But that year pause seems to be the sufficient safeguard that MPs are referencing. And so I think we need to be very careful that we don't just wait a year to implement the inevitable, but that as citizens of this great country, we can actually do something, raise our voice, raise a holy ruckus, and say, we're actually not okay with it. Even if you're planning to just pause for a year, we want to do something to ensure it doesn't expand to mental health as a sole condition. We want to make sure that the recommendation that children without the agreement or consent of their parents do not have the ability to request it and follow through with it. So I think we have a year to do that, whether, you know, the current government is saying they're taking that seriously or not.
Well, I think there's two major concerns about labeling or including those who with mental health issues, because first of all, if those mental health issues are catastrophic, then how can they possibly make that decision? And secondly, mental health is such a broad spectrum. I mean, a person can be appraised as having mental health issues for a variety of reasons, for drug abuse, for alcohol abuse, for antisocial behavior. So all of these, everybody then could be included in this, and it's a huge category. And I find that very concerning.
Well, it's especially jarring. You know, we've spent so much time to say, prevent suicide at all costs in this country, right? I kind of wonder, like March of this year, the National Suicide Hotline is supposed to go to a 988. So it's like a 3-digit number. Anyone can call at any time to get help to prevent suicide. And MAiD for mental health was going to expand right at that same time. It's just an interesting delay, but we've spent all this time, Bell Let's Talk, all these initiatives to remove the stigma of mental health, to say, like, let's stop suicide at all costs. You can call in to get help at any time if you're suicidal or are ideating. And yet now we're going to offer doctor assisted suicide across the country and expand it. It's just such a disconnect. and super confusing. And it's a mixed message that the government and medical professionals are sending across the country.
That's an interesting point. And I don't think a lot of people were even aware of that. I certainly hadn't heard that. But why are doctors so willing to be enlisted in a program like this? I mean, they took a Hippocratic oath. They're supposed to be there to save lives, not end them. Why are so many doctors marching in accordance with this?
I think there's a serious question to be raised of, is there that many that support it? Because we've talked to the executive director of Physicians for Life. We've seen a list of 4,000 plus doctors in Canada. I believe there's 30,000 doctors in Canada, approximately. Around 4,000 have actually put their name and signature on something against this that says that it's not medical assistance in dying, it's medical assisted death. So from MAiD to MAD, they call it. And that's public facing doctors putting their name and signature on it, which tells you that there could be a lot more behind the scenes. We have specifically numerous doctors that we've spoken with that, I mean, I obviously won't reveal their identities or their locations, but one specifically told me that if it continues in this direction, he will be laying down his garb and actually taking on a trade of as a plumber. And I think that like, he literally wasn't joking. Like this, the way that it's headed, and where a doctor, if they don't agree to do an assessment, they have to actually legally, according to legislation, pass the assessment to someone who is a MAiD provider or assessor, which if you read between the lines on that, well, you could actually think that they aren't eligible for MAiD. Therefore, you don't want to even consider the fact that they should be assessed, but you have to pass it on to someone who actually believes in MAiD. So all there needed to be is 2 MAiD supportive doctors or nurse practitioners in Canada, and anybody that is eligible according to those 2 assessors would be able to get MAiD. So that's a huge leap in logic when it's like the person who might be your family physician adamantly believes there's treatments, there's care, there's options for you. There's things that you could do in palliative care. There's things that you could take to support you. There's communities that you could get involved with that could help you. Because we spoke with one of the MAiD clinic leads at the Humber River Hospital, and it's just amazing to hear that he is, with the expansion into mental illness, stepping down from being involved in the MAiD clinic. And he was someone that in the original legislation in 2015 was involved in assessing people for MAiD. But when it takes this leap towards broadening and towards mental illness as sole condition, he says, like, we've fallen off a cliff. There's no slippery slope here, and we can't continue like this. I can't even be involved in this. So you have people who are of conscience that are saying there's no way that they can continue in this, even possibly continue as doctors or nurses because of where this is headed.
I think a small amount of doctors could cause a lot of people death by assisted suicide. A very small number, because it's not a huge process time-wise. It's really a dark story for our country right now.
Well, certainly history shows us that we can always find doctors, physicians, surgeons who are willing to leave their morality and ethics at the door and serve the government. And those were probably a small minority, but they did a lot of damage in terms of doctors who practiced euthanasia in the Nazi regime, doctors who practiced incredibly cruel things in the Soviet regime, and yet, you know, these. Do you think this is almost like the abortion debate in this country? There probably are not a vast majority of doctors who approve of unrestricted abortion on demand, which is what we have right now in Canada. There are no restrictions on abortion. Most Canadians don't agree with that, and I'm sure most doctors don't. But the government can always find doctors who support it, and even if that's a small minority of them. Do you see any correlation between this assisting people to kill themselves and Canada's lack of any abortion law?
Well, I think this is another example of how language matters so much, like how we talk about it matters. So, you know, the euphemism of medical assistance in dying, it sounds careful, it sounds nice, right? I've had some exchanges on social media with doctors, as I've shared just about my experience learning about, people being offered MAiD without pursuing it, because it is an obligation of doctors to offer it as treatment to patients who qualify according to certain metrics. And just even mentioning that the doctor offered to kill the patient was so offensive to a physician, although like the definition of taking a life, ending a life, is to kill, right? So just by using a euphemism even for the term itself starts to put us down a path where it makes it easy to sort of shroud what's really happening. And so I think we need to be really careful in how we speak about it. And the conversation right now is sort of like, okay, maybe in 2016 when the criminal code was modified to allow for this procedure to take place, we're almost still using that language, and yet we're talking about something totally different now. So if we don't kind of evolve our language with the evolving procedure, then people might still be referencing, oh, this is just for like old people who have chosen, and it's just this positive situation, right? But it's morphing, evolving, it's becoming something uglier than that, and it's something that is being abused. And so if we're not careful with our language, I think that you can kind of expand the culture of death without even really realizing it.
Well, and the correlation also is that it's not life. Both of the scenarios you're talking about, they're not life.
Sure.
So whatever the euphemism or whatever it is, it's ending life. And there's a very big correlation there, undoubtedly. And it's the same force behind the two, I would say.
There was a very highly reported story, I guess about 6 months ago now, and it wasn't it was a low-level functionary who recommended it, but the fact that a veteran was told he could solve his problems by having medically assisted suicide, that shocked a lot of Canadians. And it certainly, as a veteran myself, I certainly wouldn't want to go to Veterans Affairs and hear that that's my option. And that's my preferred option is to kill myself. Do you think that certainly bolstered the public knowledge of how dangerous this program is?
Oh, for sure. And I think, so we have an episode coming out this Friday. It's about that issue, and specifically Canada's Heroes, we call it. And it's featuring Christine Gauthier, who was the veteran that was injured during training in a military exercise. And she was one of the first 7 women in the combat arms artillery in the Canadian military. And basically, instead of giving her a wheelchair ramp, which she'd been fighting for 5 to 6 years, they had an outgoing call called and said, we can offer you MAiD. So instead of an essential service for her to be getting in and out of her house, they said, we can kill you. And so that was a shocking moment, because she was literally in one of the gentlemen who's a veteran, Mark Meinke, has a trauma recovery podcast. He mentions in that episode, like, she was the literal poster girl for both the Canadian military in that unit, but also as a Paralympic world champion. She was a 5-time canoe world champion, paddle champion, and they offered to kill her.
To be suicidal and depressed, and having to fight that on top of everything else. To have someone, as you're battling this, trying to fight this off every day, and you have somebody just cannonly coming to tell you, if you're really that fed up, and you really feel you can't go on anymore, you have the right to die. Made it sound so easy, so candid, so just like that, it's done. It was incomprehensible for me.
If the heroes in our country are being offered MAiD, there's something seriously wrong with Canada. And I think that is ultimately why, for myself, I really want this story to get out, and for Canadians to not just listen to this, but to actually watch it and actually follow it and actually talk about it, because we're talking about the soul of Canada. Like, do we want a country where, and it's a bit of Murphy's Law, right? If other countries are going to fight to prohibit death, but Canada is going to allow for it and broaden it, we're going to be a tourist destination for death. I mean, we're already announcing that at a Liberal government level, that this could be a tourist destination for death. It's in the language on the government's website that in some cases we will allow for foreigners to enter Canada to get medical assistance in dying. So we're already telling people, and I mean, you talk about, I traveled to Tanzania, India, these different countries, and there's always these travel advisories on the Canada government website. Don't travel to Tanzania. There could be an outbreak of Ebola. Don't travel to all these places. When are we going to put the thing on our own website for the government of Canada that says don't travel to Canada because we could kill you?
Well, that's a very good point, because I was going to say, do you think this is a reason for embarrassment, for international embarrassment, that Canada is becoming known as a place where you can be, the government will kill you? But so you're saying that we could end up as a travel destination for people wanting to commit suicide?
I'm not just saying that. I'm saying that it already is that, and it's going to become that even more.
Let's go. And that is something else. But do you think it's part of an embarrassing trend in Canada that we are becoming increasingly fixated on death, not life, and we're becoming increasingly authoritarian in our politics? I mean, in Calgary now, you can't protest a drag queen show at a library anymore, or at a elementary school, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to voice your opinions. We have censorship on the way, increasingly on the internet. And is this part of a dangerous trend in Canada, away from life and freedom and towards slavery and death?
I think it's a real opportunity to, like Dan said earlier, look in the mirror, because we know, we're Canadian, we know Canadians, they're compassionate, they're loving, they're people who help others, they're kind. I don't think that the trends that we're seeing, like you outlined, David, are trends that most Canadians are comfortable with. And I think it really matters that Canadians use the freedom they have currently, use the voice that they have, the power that they have politically, to stand up and to do something. Embarrassment, I would say even shame. Like, I think we feel ashamed about certain things happening in our country right now. And shame can be a great motivator to look in the mirror and to compel us to turn things around. When we're unified, when we work together, when we stand up for the weak and the vulnerable, as a nation, we've done incredible things all throughout history. Our grandparents moved to this country for that very reason. Canada was a haven after the war of opportunity, of peace, of freedom. And they worked in the mental health profession. I know that they would just be so ashamed of where we are now, but that doesn't have to be sort of like the thing that we have to live with. I think we can actually make a difference. And that's what this film, Made in Canada, is all about. We want to empower people with information so that they can look in the mirror and say, hey, is this the kind of country and society that I want to be part of? And if not, stand up and do something. We've done it in the past as Canadians, as part of our identity, and we can do it again. And we have a critical year. I mean, it's about 10 months now where we can make a difference. And I think Canadians will stand up, because they have in the past, but this is like a crucial moment for them to do so.
So you're promoting your film through the media, obviously, like you're doing right now. How is this film going to be shown in theaters? Is it just going to be available on the internet? How is it going to be distributed?
Right now, it's available on our site that we've made for it, madeincanada.org, MAID, incanada.org. You can access everything there. We're doing some stuff we're releasing for free. Some of it's connected to our Unveil TV channel currently. It's viewer supported. Like, we did this of our own volition here. We had no financial backing. We decided to just do this because we felt compelled. We had to. We were shocked that we weren't seeing more stuff out there about this produced, like, from Canadians. Why aren't people talking about this more? And I think that was part of the impetus behind just like getting out there and starting interviewing people. We started making calls, and we've had a lot of support for involvement. People want to help get the story out there, but we're basically just sharing it on our channel, and we'll see where it goes. We're open to pivot and move where the most people can see it. The point is for people to see it. So we're going to be getting it out there for free, and for if people can support us on our site, that would be great as well.
Well, we'll certainly do everything we can to support this project and support the work you're doing, because I think it's tremendously important. Are you optimistic that we can turn this around in Canada in the next 10 months?
Definitely. Like, I think you mentioned the authoritarian angle, it's a very few people can do a lot of damage. And it's not the majority. People are not for this. We talk a lot about, oh, this is about people who are terminally ill, and it's dignified for them. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that euthanasia. We're talking about all the other ones that are happening that are not justifiable in our minds. And most people agree with that. And they don't know that it's such a big issue, and they need to know that it's a big issue, and that we can tell our politicians and tell our doctors we're not okay with this, and we need to make a change and not go down this road any further, and actually dial it back. We need to dial this back. So I think it's just about getting people mobilized, like Andrew's saying, to actually like say something, do something, express their displeasure with the way things are going on this front.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. I hope we have reason for optimism. I sometimes wonder when I look around, not only in Canada but the United States, with the deterioration of values, deterioration of the assumptions we had for centuries that are suddenly disappearing. But certainly, when a country goes down a road like this, where euthanasia becomes almost glamorized, I think it's a very dark place to be for a nation. I'm sure you would agree that this is not where Canada wants to be.
Not at all. And I think one thing to encourage listeners or viewers is like, there's the parable that if a room is very dark but you light one candle, it puts a lot of light into that room. And a city on a hill can't be hidden. And so I think that's a message to speak out to the actual Capitol Hill of our nation. And we're going to be there at the March for Life rally on May 11th, and just sharing a little bit of our story from the series, and just shining that little bit of a light. But for anybody listening or watching, like, that one little thing you do to stand up and shine a lighting up the truth, lighting up a story, lighting up someone else's life with encouragement. I mean, if someone is suicidal, what are you going to do? Are you going to push them, or are you going to pull? And that's an amazing line in the series, is like, someone's standing on the ledge. What do? Push them or pull them? Well, the compassionate thing to do is pull them down, show them the value of their life, show them that life is beautiful and valuable and is worth fighting for at all costs. And so I think for anybody that is in Canada still and shares our view on this, share the series, watch it, talk about it, do what it is that is in your hand to do, whether that be to write a story, to do a podcast, to talk to your local MP, to do whatever it is that you have in your hand to do, write a letter, talk in your community, town hall, whatever it is, because it is the collective little tiny candles shining that is going to make the difference in this case.
That's a very good analogy. And certainly, I think a lot of people feel we are enveloped in darkness right now, but we can reclaim that light. So the March for Life this year, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first year it has been about more than just the abortion issue, but it will also be about assisted suicide?
Actually, they've done a couple times. One of the people involved with it, Kevin Dunn, he's another filmmaker. He had done a film a couple years back about euthanasia, and actually he did it in 2014 before it was legal. So he was doing interviews in Netherlands and Belgium and places, going, man, we really, some people saw this from a mile away, right? But so they kind of alluded to it a couple times, but I think now it's becoming more of a co-focus along with the abortion issue there.
Well, that's great. I want to thank all of you. We've been talking to Andrew, Matthew, and Daniel Kooman, the producers, the filmmakers behind MAiD in Canada, which is well worth watching. This is a powerful piece of documentary making, and I think every Canadian should be watching this. And I hope every Canadian does watch this. So I want to thank you all for joining me today, and we will definitely be supporting you in every way possible. So thank you again for everything you're doing.